Hey everyone, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Robby Starbuck. Robby Starbuck, I would say Robby Starbuck and Chris Rufo are two of my heroes. They both went from being filmmakers to being activists, and they both have just cut a swath through the evil stuff that the left has been piling on, the DEI and the sex stuff. Robby has been, really just continually active. He manages to keep not, I wouldn't say a low profile, because you can't do this work and keep a low profile because they'll drag you out and find you and you have to be able to talk to people. But he's managed to remain an actual human being, which I think is always impressive for anybody. And he's managed to do this work without pounding his chest about it. But it has been amazing. He's helped ban transgender surgeries and hormones for children in Tennessee and drag shows for children in Tennessee. But he's been doing some other stuff lately that is just, you'll really want to hear about. Anyway, Robby, it's great to see you again. And thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about it.
So, I want to talk about how you got into this, because it's really an interesting story. But before we start, there's some stuff that's been going on recently it's pretty dramatic. I mean, you sometimes think this stuff is unstoppable until somebody actually stands up to them. So, for instance, you took on Jamie Dimon, one of the more powerful, financial people in the world. Can you talk about how that happened and what's going on?
Yeah, it was sort of a strange fight for him to pick. He actually picked it at Davos. He went on CNBC and they asked about essentially, hey, this Robbie guy, he's going through company after company after company, getting rid of DEI and woke policies. What's the deal with JP Morgan? And he essentially said, actually, quote is, bring it on, to me, that he was going to stand firm in their policies. And so I said, okay, well, that sounds good. I reached out to CNBC and I said, I'm happy to bring it on. And so they had me on and I challenged Jamie and I said, come on and we'll do this together and I'll go through the DEI policies at JP Morgan and we can let the public decide who's crazy here. And I pulled up his DEI policies during that episode and I showed people where JP Morgan had sponsored an event for Dylan Mulvaney to speak to LGBTQ youth, is how they refer to it. I showed them how they had been training with the genderbread person and I showed them how they had spent untold millions of dollars on what they call racial equity. And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars on a regular basis they were spending. And so showing all the evidence to people in the hiring discrimination internship programs and everything, lo and behold, this is late breaking news now, right before we're filming. Jamie had a meeting last night where he did a phone call where he said, essentially, he didn't realize they were funding all this, quote, crazy shit, and it's going to stop. He's going to stop funding all the crazy shit. And the DEI trainings are going to go away, and they're going to be making more changes there. So, I think this actually speaks to a broader, larger issue within corporate America and corporations at large across the globe. A lot of the executives actually are out of touch with how crazy DEI had gotten. And essentially what started as them trying to buy a mask to pretend like, hey, it's not even pretending. It was more so a desire to tell the public, hey, look, we're not racist. Look, see, we have this DEI department, so we're not racist. It was a desperation to prove they weren't racist. When in fact, I think everybody could just look at the marketplace and know that major companies are not racist. If anything, they're racist against white people and Asians. But, beyond that, then DEI sprung in and they became explicitly racist to white people and Asians. And so that's where things really took a weird turn, where the left used DEI as a Trojan horse. And so I think a lot of executives through our project, they've become aware of how crazy their companies have really gone. And that's really the story of what we've done, is we've educated executives about exactly what their own companies are doing. And many of them just straight up did not realize it.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, I think the whole thing after George Floyd just became a kind of panic. And you'd think that people like Jamie Dimon, with the intelligence and experience and power that they have, you'd think they say, oh, this is a panic. We don't really have to respond to this. But they don't. They just panic like everybody else. And they lose control of the people under them, too.
Well, keep in mind, these are different types of intelligence. And I think that's something people have missed, is like, yes, these executives are very, very, very astute when it comes to financial things. They're very astute when it comes to the corporate world and sort of how to work those politics. And they're even pretty good in the political realm when it comes to things like regulation and, donating to the right people and having the right lobbyists and things like that, where they are sort of, I'd say, intellectually retarded is when it comes to cultural issues. They really don't get a lot of cultural issues, because you got to remember, these executives live in a bubble that is a totally different culture than the one normal people live in. So they're totally divorced from reality in that respect. And so when George Floyd happened and they had all these PR people that they generally lean on and trust for how do we make our company look good, come to them and say, you need to do this or else people are going to say you're racist. They just said, sure, yeah, that makes sense. How much money do we have to spend on it? And some of them didn't even ask that. Some of them just said, okay, let's sign the check, right? And so it resulted in these departments being formed. And where things really went wrong is from the very beginning, these executives had no idea that a lot of this was planned and coordinated with outside Democratic Party groups. And so when the people made these pitches, they were ready to put activists at the helm at major corporations in charge of these DEI departments and to use their own money to push a type of leftism that, if we're really honest, is not just, culturally poisonous. It's also counter to everything we believe in terms of economics and capitalism. Because I could tell you something, this is really interesting to me, always will be. I've done hundreds of these DEI trainings because I wanted to know exactly what these people who work at major companies are having to go through. And I wanted to find common threads. And the common thread that is really interesting to me is the number one most promoted resource at the end of all these trainings, because they'll give you this section of like podcasts you should listen to, books you should read. It was actually Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, a book that's predicated on the idea that you have to oppose capitalism in order to be anti-racist. So you had major corporations, biggest ones in the world, who are supposed to be focused on making money, returning value for shareholders, pushing the idea to their employees that they should embrace communism. Like, the irony of that is so bizarre, you almost can't make it up. But it was really happening at so many of these major companies. And that's still, to this day, very few things shock me or blow my mind, very few. And that's one of them. When I came across that so many times, that pattern really did blow my mind, that these companies didn't even realize they were pushing communism on their own employees. And then they wonder why their employees are cheering for this guy who shot the healthcare CEO. It's because you've been pushing communism on them and they've started to embrace these ideas.
That is amazing. I mean, Ibram X. Kendi, I read his book, from cover to cover. The guy is a nitwit, and he's obviously now, it seems like, kind of a corrupt nitwit. He took all the money from people and didn't do anything with it. And the fact that people looked at that book, I mean,
it speaks to the stupidity of that period of time after George Floyd, that somebody like Ibram Kendi was lifted up as some sort of heroic figure and great writer. He is not only not a great writer, he's not smart. If you read the books, it is not smart. There are so many logical fallacies within the book. You don't have to go further than a couple of chapters to be able to find all the different holes where everything collapses on itself if you actually try to construct an ideology out of the book.
It's amazing. Now, the other thing you've been working on, which I'm thrilled to hear about, and a little startled to hear about, actually, is Disney. If ever there was a betrayal of the founding principles of a company, it was Disney's attempt to push sexual diversity on little children, and to insert that into their stories. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, their recent films, ever since that brief, beautiful resurgence of the Lion King and the Little Mermaid, where they actually came back after a long time, they've really destroyed the company's brand. They've destroyed everything about it. And you seem to feel that maybe that's not going to continue. Is that fair?
Well, I always say the proof is in the actions, right? They can say a lot of words because they want to avoid any collapse in their stock. And that's one of the stories that a lot of people haven't really talked about yet is our stories. They move the markets. In the event of, let's say, Tractor Supply, they lost almost $3 billion in market cap when we were focused on them. John Deere lost $10 billion. And the story goes on and on and on. And every company, with the exception of one out of over 20 companies now who have announced the end to DEI through us and our stories, has had their stock go up directly after announcing that they've dropped it. So the market has responded extremely positively. So you've got to keep in mind, companies realize there's a financial incentive now, and that's just how the market's reacting to these things. So some companies, I'm sure, will put lip service to things and then their actions will not follow suit. And we're tracking that very closely. And kind of what makes our project special in terms of how we expose these companies is it starts with whistleblowers inside the companies. So when they say they're going to change, if they don't actually change, we will find out because employees inside will be the first ones to go, hey, they're still doing this crazy stuff. And so that allows us, some level of oversight in a weird way, that, it's really coming straight from the people who are there, experiencing. And I think that's a good thing, so that customers are acutely aware of what they're supporting with their money. And at the end of the day, I've had some people say, is this cancel culture what you're doing or something along those lines? Well, the answer is no. This is very clearly capitalism. This is the free market at work. This is informing consumers about where their money's actually going and saying, hey, your wallet's a weapon. Use it how you want to support your values. And so a company like Disney, we went to them about 3 weeks ago and let them know that we had an investigation going and we had this story we were working on. And we said, essentially, we like to be fair to companies. We want to understand, are there changes that you guys are working on, things along those lines. I can't go too deep into the whole thing, but we did receive a response that will be on the record that we'll release soon, day before yesterday, that goes into detail about certain changes. And so they will be making some changes here. And I think that is sort of a first step, is seeing, how do they implement these things? What do they do right? What do they do wrong here? And we're going to stay eagle-eyed and tell the stories, right? Because things may not be perfect and we need to get them to the best place possible. But, at the end of the day, this project has been about restoring American greatness, right? Like I have 4 kids ranging from 4 months to 16 years old. And I want my kids to be able to live in the country and experience the things I was able to. Like I want my 2 youngest kids to be able to go to Disneyland. Neither of them have been able to, right? Because Disney's gone crazy since then. And so it's my hope we can restore these companies to a place where your average American family can actually, sort of be able to go out and spend money and do the things they want to do and buy the things they want to buy without worrying about possibly funding things that are diametrically opposed to the things that they believe in the most.
Yeah, that to me, and I think to most people, the election of Donald Trump has set off, let's say, a vibe shift that may be the most dramatic vibe shift of my life, which has now gone on since the Civil War, practically. I mean, I've been around for a long time. And I mean, after Reagan, there was a genuine change, but this is different. Are you experiencing that? Is that something you're seeing as you're in the trenches trying to do this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a palpable fear when we reach out to companies. In fact, there's a CEO at one of the biggest companies in America who I talked to. We'd gotten changes out of the company and they called me a few weeks later and they were very happy, by the way, to change. Like we were basically an excuse to change, and they were so excited that we reached out to them because they wanted, a way to get out. And some of them are like that. Some of them are not. Some are true believers and you really got to fight. But this one was not. And I remember they said, when we got your email, I mean, it was like chickens with their heads cut off. Everybody was running around like, oh, crap, is he going to release, a video without us getting a chance to respond, or need to respond super quick, or we may risk him, going out there and all these people, and it could turn into Bud Light 2.0, right? And so that palpable fear is new, and it's directly correlated to the fact that the entire culture is shifting, right? I mean, in my lifetime, I've never seen the Democrats be coded as lame as they are now. I mean, they're dorky, they're lame, they're weird, they seem totally out of touch with what's popular culture, and they're trying hard in this weird way that almost seems like they're like the theater kids who weren't good enough to actually be in theater. And so I was watching this clip yesterday of people in Congress, and there's this guy, I don't even know his name, but he's Latino like I am, right? But he like overdoes his eyebrows, has so much Botox his face can't move. And he's sitting there and he delivers this thing, and he's practiced this line. You could just see it like 10,000 times in the mirror, where he uses the quote from the Kendrick Lamar song where he says A minor. It didn't even structurally make sense in what he was saying, but it's like in the Democrats' heads, this is what connects and works. And the public watches it and they're like, this is so cringe, it's not even funny, right? But that's the Democratic Party now. Like it encapsulated the Democrats for me, that little short clip, because that's how out of touch they are. They don't get it, and then there's this bill yesterday in Ohio where you've got these 2 Democrats, and keep in mind how Ohio has shifted to the right so drastically since Trump came on the scene. And you've got these 2 Democrats in Ohio whose knucklehead idea is to push a bill where you fine men $10,000 for ejaculating without the intention to procreate, right? And they think that actually is like a really cute, funny thing to do that the public's going to like. Well, the polling showed that only 25% of people thought in any way it was amusing. 75% thought it was a ridiculous waste of time, thought it was absolutely just, I'm not even going to use the word because I only have bad words for it. And you think about that, the cultural disconnect it takes to think something like that is a good idea. I don't know how Democrats think they're ever going to win a state like Ohio ever again. And I think in some way, we should all be thanking them, because that disconnect and their dedication to losing is almost impressive at this point.
Now, you guys know I don't sleep much, but I do have to sleep sometimes. I know it's hard to believe, but yes, sometimes I have to go to sleep. And that's why I love Beam's Dream Powder. It's a science-backed, healthy hot cocoa for sleep. It's completely transformed my nighttime routine. When I need to sleep, I don't want to take one of those sleep aids that can cause next day grogginess. Dream just contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. And you can look up every one of those ingredients. You will find it will help you. Dream Powder is also tested for high-quality efficacy and formulated to ease your body into rest, supporting all 4 stages of the sleep cycle to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. And the best part is it really tastes good. I'm talking about sea salt caramel, brownie batter. I haven't tried that one. That sounds great. Vanilla chai and their original cinnamon cocoa. Each serving is only 15 calories, 0 sugar. Just mix it with hot water or milk, and you've got yourself the most delicious bedtime drink that actually helps you sleep better. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Klavan and use code Klavan at checkout. And I know you're thinking, how do you spell Beam? It's BEAM. No, you're not. You don't care. It's BEAM.com/Klavan, and you use code Klavan for up to 40% off. So what you really want to know is how to spell Klavan. It's KLAVAN. I talked about this on my show last Friday, that they don't understand that their idea structure has actually collapsed. And it's not, they'll say things like, we may have pushed the transgender thing too far. And you go like, no, that was evil per se. You can't push it too far. You can't push it at all when you're butchering children's bodies without any kind of science behind it. They think, oh, we went too far. We went too fast for the public to catch up with us because the public are such stupid morons. They have nowhere to go until they say, oh, we did evil and we repent in in sackcloth and ashes. They've got no way to change. So I want to ask you something because that really interests me, but I think it interests a lot of people. A lot of people watch this stuff happen and they felt absolutely helpless. And a lot of them felt worse than helpless because they were under threat. So they were in work and they had to go to these very offensive, training programs that told them that they were too white and definitely bigoted, and they were racist when they weren't. That's a terrible thing. They felt really upset, belittled, helpless. I wanted to ask you personally how you got into this and what the journey was like. So you actually started. You were a filmmaker, right? You were working in the film business.
Yeah, that's right. Part of why I did this is essentially because I made myself uncancelable, and I recognized that for an average person, they were not in a position to be able to do what I was able to do. And so I felt it was incumbent on me to take the risks that other people couldn't take, because God had blessed me and I had done well enough in my career where, essentially I had prepared myself for being able to be honest. And I could see for a lot of people, they couldn't afford to be honest anymore, right? So in Hollywood, I directed Oscar-winning actors, actually some of the biggest music stars. I owned my own production company where we had over a dozen other directors across the globe. And, I had done well enough to invest well across the market and in real estate and things like that. So I had set myself up well to leave Hollywood. I knew the minute I came out and endorsed Trump in 2015 during the primary, it was going to be a disaster. And it was predictably a disaster. Everybody was dropping us. It was something I was totally prepared for, though. So from there, I said, my mission and my duty is to be honest, to live my values, and to show my kids that I'm willing to risk everything and anything to stand up for what I believe in. Because at the end of the day, it goes even deeper for me. My family's from Cuba. So my family lost everything to communism, absolutely everything. They came here with nothing. My family, even many of them risked death just to become an American citizen because they did it the right way. They came legally, and in some cases had to wait years in hiding to be able to get through that legal process so the Castro regime wouldn't kill them or send them to jail. And so having that as sort of the underpinning of your childhood is that your mom is never going to let you forget how lucky you are to be an American. And my father figure was my great grandfather, and his name was Raphael, and he was very much a teacher of history to me. And so he taught me all the signs and essentially said it's your responsibility, no matter what your station in life is, to stand up, because had regular men and women stood up in Cuba earlier and not been afraid to speak up, weren't afraid of losing friends or losing business, and they did the right thing, Cuba never would have been captured by communism. It was that fear of speaking up, fear of being honest, fear of freedom of speech that really sold out the people there to communism and destroyed their lives. And so, from a very early childhood age, I had dedicated my life to that purpose and reason, which was like, if this ever happens in America, I will risk everything to make sure my kids don't experience the same thing my family already lost once. And so as I saw that train coming, and I really saw it coming back in 2015, you got to keep in mind, so we were in Calabasas at that point, like literally same community as the Kardashians, right? And my kids went to this elite school in Calabasas where they had just started teaching about white privilege and DEI. I had never heard either of these terms before. So a lot of people didn't know this stuff even existed back then. It came in there. Scott Baio and his family went there as well. And Scott and I were the two, people who really stood up along with our wives and challenged the administration and went to war with this ideology. And it was at that time where I realized this was going to be a pervasive poison that stretched into not just academia, but into the corporate world, because these kids who were in college at the time were going to get hired into these different HR departments and things like that. And I knew they were going to sell this. And so, it was a long road to George Floyd. But once George Floyd hit, it was like, it's not just gasoline on a fire. I mean, it was like, this was a nuclear bomb moment for the left to be able to just run roughshed over us. And they did. And so that's really what led me to all of this is, how can I strategically, sort of place myself to do as much good as I can do? And that's kind of how I look at my life every day is, what can I do to do good, make a difference, make sure our country is in that place for my kids and grandkids to live in a country filled with opportunity like I was able to. And DEI is the enemy of that. I mean, if we're being real with each other, like my wife's Scottish, I look at my kids and I realize that they can check two boxes. They can check either Latino or they can check white when they, go to a job application or try to get into college. As parents that they have an advantage by checking a box that says Latino, says we live in a racist country. Okay. They shouldn't get an advantage by checking Latino. That's racism. It's just people have been afraid for a long time to call it out. And you talked about the fact that people have felt hopeless. Well, part of the reason for that, and people go, how were you so successful with this project? I mean, who else was trying? Who else was doing anything? And I think that's one of the things that society started to lack. And I think that goes and ties into masculinity is a lot of our men just stopped trying, right? And I think a lot of that even feeds back into the education system where we're trained to deny our own biological traits and values, to stand up for women, stand up for the innocent, stand up for our country, embrace nationalism, embrace patriotism, embrace God. We denied our own biology and existence for so long that so many men just feel totally divorced and unplugged from it. And so I am thankfully not one of those people. And I know that I'm willing to die for what I believe in. And thankfully, I think every day more and more men are feeling that way. And ultimately, some people may scoff at that and they go well, isn't that a dangerous energy to have? I think it's actually the healthiest energy to have. It's the energy that built this country. The men who founded this country, many of them, people don't realize they died for what they believe in. They didn't have a beautiful life. They didn't get to have wealth for their families. A lot of the men we celebrate today who were the founders, who wrote these incredible documents at a very, very young age, they died at very young ages. Many of them died in war. They died in horrible conditions. They lost children as infants, as 2-year-olds, as 5-year-olds. Their young sons fought alongside them. And so I think that's the energy we need if we want to maintain. And, as a lot of people have said, Elon has said, I've said, live through the second American Revolution. We have this beautiful opportunity to do the same thing so that our kids and grandchildren can have this incredible country. But we have the added benefit of the fact that we don't have to die to do it, right? Which is, much less risky. And so we have to be honest with ourselves about the fact that we have to have courage again. Like men need to take a leadership role and have that courage and do these things. And that's why we were ultimately successful is we formulated a plan. We deeply analyzed every angle of it in the psychology and how we did it and when we did it, what went first, what went last, what buttons do you press at which time. And, I think we need more of that in many different sectors and many different places in our politics. And I think that's what's been wonderful about what Elon's doing at Doge is he's doing sort of the same thing. He's got an actual strategy and he's trying it and doing it. I mean, how many Republicans have been in power in DC to even attempt this sort of thing and have never attempted it because they've just been perfectly happy to just have power, a title, and a pin they get to put on their suit. That's the truth. So we need to re-engage in an era where men gain their honor, their status by the risks they're willing to take and by doing great and hard things.
Yeah, it's real. First of all, I have to say that as much as I've seen in life, I was actually shocked at how easily Americans rolled over. when COVID came in and when they shut everything down and when people were pointing at each other like somebody in a Twilight Zone episode or in the invasion of the body snatchers, you're not wearing a mask, you're not vaccinated and all that stuff. It was appalling to me. And to see it in New York, where people usually used to be pretty stroppy, used to stand up against authority, and they just caved in completely. And I think that you're absolutely right. My interview last week was with Louise Perry, who's a very smart lady in Britain, and she was saying that what keeps society inventive and explosive and moving forward are young men. When you have an excess of young men, they do new things, they do fresh things, they break the rules, and hopefully they break the rules in good ways, not bad ways. But still, that spirit has disappeared is a frightening thought. It can't possibly disappear. Which leads me to my next question, which is, now you were in a great position. I mean, I also lost my lucrative Hollywood career and was not in anywhere near as good position. I just didn't, I just never considered the consequences because of all the stuff you're talking about, how important it is. But what if an ordinary guy who doesn't maybe have a big nest egg had come to you in that moment and said, what do I do? They're telling me that I have to, hate my whiteness, or I have to say these words that I don't want to say, that I have to sign these, vows that I don't want to say. What would you have said to him at that moment?
Well, there's a number of ways to look at this. Number one is, how did the left get to this moment in time where they had ascended culturally despite being divorced from what actually makes sense and what is popular and what people understand to be true, and like they're disconnected from reality as a whole. They think women can have penises and everything. Like, how did they attain the power they have? Well, they had a lot of people who very silently worked within the system to bring it into alignment with their values, right? So if we have people who are out there right now in major corporations or in the government in positions where they could attain power and they could shift the system back towards sanity, that maybe being able to undercut a certain, policy set by attaining a position, one higher by just kind of grinding your teeth and going through it and getting into that position. That's one option, one direction people can go. Another one is to use the legal system for your benefit, right? So you've got these companies violating the law, and you've got, lawyers and law firms on our side who are willing to do the work to go out there like America First Legal and sue these companies. And you may be able to actually make a decent chunk of change by being able to prove the racism within these companies and the way they violated civil rights laws. Because keep in mind, again, a vast majority of companies, in my opinion, have violated our civil rights laws in egregious ways where there is absolutely harm done to their employees. And those employees, I think, who have been discriminated against are entitled to significant amounts of money in terms of, settlements that could happen. Because if this sort of thing happens and you do go engaged and you do this sort of thing and you've proven a company's done this, it could affect you for life. And so I think those companies have to have some pretty big payouts. So you're going to see things like that, by the way. I mean, I already know cases are going right now where you're going to see sizable payouts from these big companies to employees and prospective employees too, people who tried to get a job and they were ultimately discriminated against because they were white. I know of a case right now off the top of my head. For legal reasons, I can't say the company yet because they are going to be, I think, held accountable. But they put in their HR, they were consistently talking about the race of candidates, and they actually declined certain candidates because of their race. And they directly said, well, if we're hiring this white person, the next one has to be a minority, right? And so these are explicit cases of companies breaking the law. And I think that, we hold those companies accountable, we're going to rein a lot of that back in. Same thing with religious freedom. If you have a company that's trying to force you to sign an ally pledge, they're essentially putting you in a position, if that company also marks your performance based on DEI, and that plays into your DEI performance, they're violating your religious freedom because they're pitting you in a position where you have to violate your faith in order to advance at work. And so, all of these things are areas where if they were on the left, they'd be using the system to be able to, bring pressure. And I think that's the thing I tell people all the time is like, find some way to bring pressure or advance the ball every day. I don't look at every day and say, I need a massive win today. I look at every day and I say, how do I advance the ball? How do I push forward a little bit? Because, the truth is, if you look back at time, the idea of being a conservative, unfortunately, for the past 30 years, they've conserved nothing, right? I consider myself very conservative politically, but I'm almost sickened to call myself one because of association to the lackluster, mostly men who were in charge who essentially were okay with just signing over our kids' futures and grandkids' futures in order to just attain the power, status, and money they had. And so I think the new conservative class, the new wave of people on the right who are attaining power now, are ones who are very forward thinking in the respect that they understand we're not just here to conserve. We're not here to stop. We need to be on offense all the time. You need to actually advance the ball. Being a conservative doesn't just mean you conserve what's there. You have to build. You have to build and innovate and create something great. Absolutely. So that you bring in people who aren't maybe naturally as right-wing as you are. And the only way to do that is to build a beautiful life for everybody in your country. And so that gives me hope, though, because I do see that. I see people like us who are out there, have that same spirit, same energy, and they want to build that future.
Well, that's great. I'm out of time, unfortunately, because I still have a lot of questions I want to ask you. But where do people go to support the work you're doing?
Yeah, you can subscribe to me on X at Robby Starbuck, Robby Starbuck, or go to robbystarbuck.com. And if you have a big DEI tip for a big company, we don't really do smaller companies. We do the really big ones. You can go to robbystarbuck.com/DEI. There's also a way to give one time there at that link. And that contributes to us hiring researchers. And we're going to be launching, actually, I'm on part of our new set right now. We're going to be launching a regular, video series on all of these things so people can understand how to talk about this issue. How do you address it at work? How do you address, all these different things? And we'll give people updates on the wins and things like that. So we're excited about that. And that'll be a regular thing for people to be able to learn more.
Robbie, it's great talking to you. I think you're doing God's work, and I appreciate it, and I know a lot of people do. So thanks for coming on. It's good talking to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Always good to talk to Robbie and hear what he's doing. It's amazing how much he gets accomplished and has accomplished, and I'm sure will accomplish. Absolutely terrific work. And if you want to hear more terrific work, come to the Andrew Klavan Show on Friday. I will be there. I would love it if you were there as well.